The convergence of a range of evolving technologies, such as artificial intelligence, blockchain, and the Internet of Things, has led to the evolution of a new concept known as the Bionic Supply Chain. Today on LokadTV, we're delighted to be joined by Stefan Gstettner, a partner at BCG. He's going to tell us a little bit more about this concept and how it compares to some of the existing techniques on the marketplace. So, Stefan, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Thanks.
So perhaps as a sort of a first sort of question, perhaps you could just sort of tell us a little bit more about your background and also what you're doing at BCG.
Yes, absolutely. So as you said, I'm a partner in BCG focusing on end-to-end supply chain management and the associated logistics questions of that. And in this role, I'm helping our global clients in core industries to take use of the new opportunities in digital technologies and then gradually transform their supply chains into digital supply chains, whatever that specifically is. So we will probably talk about this. And to be able to do this, I think I have to qualify a little bit. So I have a 25 years background in supply chain management, even started with a PhD, I think at times where it wasn't even called supply chain management. And then I had various roles in consultancy, but then also I was running the operations of omnichannel retail company back in Germany for 7 years. So also have been on the other side of the table, obviously. And then one interesting role, I'm an adjunct professor at the MIT. So I'm teaching young talents in digital supply chain management because talent probably is the biggest bottleneck in supply chain management. So that's a role I very much enjoy in their global scale program. And that hopefully qualifies me to help our clients to develop their supply chains.
Brilliant. And today our sort of topic is this idea of a bionic supply chain.
Yes.
Certainly sounds very futuristic, but perhaps you could just give us a little bit of an initial overview.
Yeah, and then, I mean, we are far away from trying to introduce another buzzword into the game, because there are many buzzwords around, but I think we really have to take it seriously. So my colleagues from the BCG think tank, the Bruce Henderson Institute, they have developed a very good view on how the company of the future will look like, and that is obviously a lot around the collaboration between machines, artificial intelligence, all that, and humans. And how should a company organize in order to make best use of this combination? And they called it the bionic company. And now for supply chain management, it's particularly relevant because supply chain is in one place a lot around technology and analytics and artificial intelligence, but maybe even more important, it's a lot about collaboration, the collaboration between humans and collaborations between humans and machines. So it was a bit of a mandate to break this bionic company theme down to supply chain management, and that's why we call it bionic supply chain, again, without trying to introduce a buzzword, but I think it's a very reasonable, very good theme, and it's a good headline below or above what we want to achieve.
It's okay, we absolutely love a buzzword on this sort of channel. Joannès, we've sort of spoken in the past about that sort of relationship between humans and sort of machines when we looked at sort of user interfaces. What are your initial thoughts on this idea of a bionic supply chain?
And it's, I believe it's very, very relevant, and indeed it kind of matches quite a lot what Lokad has been doing, although a bit accidentally. We didn't have this kind of big master plan of this vision. It just turned out that the way we kind of approach historically those supply chain problems is that we were tech guys, developing software tools for predictive optimization of supply chain, and we very quickly realized that there was so much complexity we had to cope with. So the idea of having like a machine learning algorithm that would figure out on its own how to solve a problem as simple as, let's say, store allocation, it's just, there is just too much edge cases. So we needed to have something where we could start from human insight and shape the problem into something that where the machine could be used to scale out the insights at the scale of a large retail network. That was kind of the idea for what we did. And it became this sort of idea of what we call at Lokad the supply chain scientist, which is literally someone who is frontally responsible for crunching the data and generating decisions and insights while being the first point of contact for actual people who can challenge whatever is happening in this system. So yes, I think we are maybe not yet to be qualified, bionic, but it's literally some, I think, path in this direction. Although I didn't have, something as sharp as Bionic Supply Chain to guide our path when we were working forward.
Okay, and let's look maybe a bit historically now. You mentioned you've got over 25 years experience in the industry. Why would you say historically it's been so difficult for humans to kind of interact with these machines?
Yeah, I wouldn't even say it's historically. So I mean, we probably all have, coded algorithms already 20 years ago, so that's not the news. But now, even not historically, but in the past years, there have been a lot of investments into digital aids. Let's take demand forecasting, for example. There's huge amount of intelligence flowing into demand forecasting. And then there is obviously also collaboration between humans and algorithms here. However, the full value, so the executives I talk to, they don't see yet that the full value out of the supply chain has come. And for my insight is it's because the humans were quite busy in trying to understand how can I collaborate with a machine. It's much more demanding to do it with algorithms than to do it with Excel, for example. Now, being so busy doing that, I think what has lost focus is a little bit that end-to-end supply chain management is about end-to-end, surprisingly. It's not about focusing on a sub-function. It's about aligning and synchronizing the end-to-end supply chain. And that, in my eyes, has lost a little bit of focus. So now we have to enter into the bionic type of thing to re-emphasize that humans need to collaborate, obviously with the help of machines. And that is, I think, what has not happened yet. And that is why some executives are frustrated because their investments haven't paid off. And so, therefore, we are saying it needs a bionic operating model, which is essentially four elements. It's first of all the guidance in the supply chain, so the good old KPIs. What do we want to achieve with our supply chain? Is it speed? Is it reliability? Is it cost focus? And how do we segment the supply chain and how do we put target values to it? Good old supply chain management, nothing digital without it or in it. Then the operating model, which is in our belief a very much platform-driven operating model to put the people who are synchronizing the supply chain together, even physically together sometimes. Secondly, skills, of course. I mean, totally different set of people who are capable of designing the end-to-end supply chain. And then technological platform, but maybe not as the first one, but as the foundation. Of course, we need it. And that, in very few companies, has been established so far. And therefore, I think historically, that is a bit of the disappointment about digital supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on a really good sort of point there, and I think, Joannès, we've definitely spoken in the past about how humans seem much happier to kind of interact with those Excel spreadsheets rather than with algorithms. I mean, what have you observed when it's come to sort of transforming supply chains in the industry?
I mean, indeed, as a vendor, Lokad is a software vendor for those enterprise solutions. One of the pitfalls was indeed that if you don't manage to kind of grasp this end-to-end, what you actually effectively deliver is just problem displacement. You displace a problem from one location to another, and maybe your KPIs on the silo that you've taken over looks good, but actually you've created problems sideways, so you've not actually delivered much. Worst case, you've actually destroyed values, which is very, very bad, but some large enterprise vendors are quite good at doing that, unfortunately. And then the challenge is that as soon as you want to do something like end-to-end, software-wise, it becomes such an incredible challenge because your software becomes so incredibly complicated. And I think most people would agree that the average ERPs, we're talking thousands of tables, hundreds of screens, so it's like, whoa. So much complexity, and we are barely scratching the surface. So we have really a problem of complexity management. And so the question is, how can you get what people are doing in Excel? That's my perception. And they are doing something that is very human, but that's very, very difficult to replicate with machines, is being approximately true as opposed to be exactly wrong. Machines are very, very good at being exactly wrong at large scale, super speed, whatever. And at Lokad, we had to kind of we had some mini breakthrough like probabilistic forecasting to kind of get closer to this idea of I would say approximately true, state of operation, but it's an ongoing change. And the thing is that while I think it's a technologically very relevant answer, it's also a very surprising answers to people who are running the supply chain, because it doesn't look at all what they were doing before, with especially compared to classical forecasting. So probabilistic forecasting is forecasting. It's about knowing things about the future, but it's so bizarre compared to the classical way that indeed, in terms of adoption, it's a big challenge on its own.
Okay, we've sort of spoken a little bit historically. How about now in the sort of the present day? I mean, what are you observing in the way that supply chain executives are kind of approaching these problems and trying to implement new technologies?
Yeah. So, I mean, executives are not primarily interested in implementing technologies. They are interested in increasing the value for their company, preparing for the future. So what they are seeing increasingly and what they get external input on all the time is that, of course, in 10 years from now, it will look massively different. So my favorite saying, I think Bill Gates said this: we are always overestimating the change in the next 2 years, and we are underestimating the change in the next 10 years. So, and the role of executives is to look 10 years ahead and not only 2 years ahead. And this is what they are now asking their organizations to do. The future will look totally different. Let's face it, we don't see it now, but it will be the case. So how can we change? Not primarily technology-wise, but then also organizational-wise. That's why we are emphasizing the operating model more. And then, of course, they are also asking, and what will be the foundational platform or the foundational, let's say, support on the system and data side and analytics side in order to drive this change. And I think they are still struggling to understand there are so many technology opportunities, but why does my organization not drive the change that I wanted to change? There are some inhibitors who still don't make the company future ready. So that's, I think, what's in the top of the mind of the executives.
Yeah, and I love this idea of being sort of future ready. I mean, when we're talking about a bionic supply chain, it sounds like something out of Iron Man. Sounds very cool and futuristic. What's it actually look like in reality?
I mean, the reality is kind of frustrating, and but also, I mean, I'm very enthusiastic about it. But first, let's start. The frustration part is when you want to cope with the supply chain reality, you end up dealing with literally hundreds of tables that just represent the world. That is just a digital counterpart of the world. The world is very messy, and so if you don't want to be on this exactly wrong, side of the problem, you need to cope with the complexity. So you end up where you have to deal with your statistical models and whatnot to deal with things like flooded warehouses, bizarre two-ways compatibilities in aerospace parts, expiration dates at the lots level for fresh food. So you end up with plenty of complexities that needs to be embraced. So that's a lot of efforts. And I would say tech-wise, you don't end up with something that is kind of pure or clean, as most good software products can be. Then you have another thing is that as soon as you in theory, we would like to have like a super rational approach of supply chain where we do optimization, and people would agree that if it improves the bottom line, it's good for the company. If you have externalities like, let's say, environment impacts, you would factor that so that you properly optimize, externalities included extra. But then what I've observed is that in a very mundane way, when people are facing KPIs, it's very tough on them. And for example, we had experience where, let's say, a large retail network, we just diagnosed that the stock, which is kind of obvious in insight, but the stock in the stores is playing two roles. One is to serve the clients, so you have some euros of stock to just be sure that when people walks into the store, they can, be properly serviced. And you realize that actually a big portion of the stock is not there to serve this purpose. It's just there for merchandising purposes. It's just to make the store appealing. But then you realize that you should probably move the budget for the stock, that is for merchandising purposes, to marketing as opposed to supply chain, because you see it's just a way to acquire more demand. But then you can imagine, and we had this situation in the past at Lokad, the sort of super intense political struggle for the department that is just going to end up having a massive amount of stuff being pushed on their budget. And sometimes they might even have things like bonuses that are at stake, and it's very accidental, obviously. But for the upper management, it means that they have so many loose ends to de-entangle to just kind of make it work so that people are not, at war with the change just because it's their own personal interest or something similar.
Okay, as we love buzzwords so much on this channel, I'm going to introduce another one.
Yeah.
This concept of a digital twin. How does that kind of fit in with an idea of a bionic supply chain? Where does it come into the picture?
Yeah. Now, so my experience indeed is digital twin is difficult because everybody has a different understanding. Everybody has a different understanding on supply chain. Then you put digital on top, which makes it more fuzzy. And then you have a digital twin and it's clear what happens. Nobody knows what it is about. But I don't try a definition of digital twin, but let's say the idea to have a representation of the end-to-end supply chain, and I fully agree with you, it will never be a 100% accurate representation, but at the moment we have a 10% accurate end-to-end representation. So if there is something like a 80% good representation of the end-to-end supply chain, and we start learning how the system dynamics in the end-to-end supply chain is, and if I have a spike in demand forecast here, what does it mean on my target inventory? What does it mean? How can I play around with my production sequence? What does it mean on my supply side? What are the scenarios, the end-to-end scenarios that I can play through? If we start thinking in this way, then a digital twin, in the best sense, can be the vehicle to enable the people who are running the end-to-end supply chain to play around with scenarios and take smart decisions. And if that is meant with the digital twin, then I buy into this as one of the key enablers to that.
Okay, great. We'll start sort of wrapping things up a little bit now. Joannès, if we kind of look ahead to the future, what can we do to our supply chains to kind of make them a little bit more bionic?
I mean, we need probably better classes of tools to kind of augment the human intelligence. It's a big word, but but it can be also something pretty mundane, pretty simple. For example, Excel is clearly something where a human with average mathematical capabilities can deal with superhuman, amount of numbers. In the 19th centuries, it would have been literally impossible to crunch, thousands, tens of thousands of basic operations per day with just a clerk, even if it was like a massively brilliant clerk. So in a way, suddenly people could get quantitative insights at a relatively inhuman scale with something like Excel. Excel comes with many problems when you want to model something really complex, so it cannot be the end answer. And so far, I think the class of answers I like the most are on the programming side, but that's a personal taste, I would say. I'm a techie. So far, I think it has been programming approach has been the most successful, kind of tool to decouple human insight or to turn them into something that is relatively robotized. I don't think we are it's not the history is not done. There is plenty of more stuff to come, but that's probably what I am banking on for the next couple of years. So 10 years ahead, maybe I would say underestimating, some paradigm shift or whatever. That I don't know, but that's the angle. But I know also, and I think although there are some people are teaching at MIT and trying very hard to, deliver smart talents to supply chain, I know that getting access to all the talent that you need is going to be a massive bottleneck for that, and probably for multiple decades. And here I'm pretty sure about my multiple decade forecast, just because those things are so slow. It takes 10 years to train people that in turn can acquire experience so that they can train people in turn. So there is still it's probably one of the core reasons why Silicon Valley is still so successful today, is just that they had generation of software engineers, talented, that could train more software engineers and produce more unicorns. But that's literally, it takes literally decades to kind of reproduce those kind of tech hubs. Same thing with MIT. I mean, tons of universities are trying to replicate MIT, but it will take half a century to get there.
Okay, we'll leave the final word to our guest. Stefan, in kind of your views, what would a successful supply chain initiative, a bionic supply chain initiative, look like?
Yeah. No, first of all, I agree that there will be, of course, a much higher degree of automation, and then technology will take over maybe something like 95% of the decision making in an end-to-end supply chain. Not maybe not precisely, but let's say directionally right. But the truth is, I think there will always be human interaction needed. So what we need to design for a successful supply chain is a human-centric still operating model, which will run the supply chain of the future, and that is the operating model elements that I have described earlier. Now, there's one aspect that humans have certain behaviors, and then the key question is, if we want to change behavior, and we need to change behavior because the historical silo behavior hasn't been particularly successful, then we need to understand how do we change behavior. And what we believe in is that the context in which humans behave is the most important driving force for behavior. So if we don't really go to the root cause and change context, for example, isolated target setting, or you drive down inventory now no matter what, and then there's another one who wants high product availability, and obviously this is a clash. So if we don't change the context of having balanced, well-synchronized sets of targets, for example, then the humans will never change their behavior, and then we will never drive success and performance. So therefore, I think the smart combination between what you guys are doing and what companies need to acquire on the human side, the smart connection between the two, which we might call the bionic supply chain, that is the future, I think.
Okay, brilliant. Well, we're going to have to wrap it there, but thanks both for your time.
Thank you.
So that's everything for this week. Thanks very much for tuning in, and we'll see you again next time. Bye for now.